Hey everybody, so my name is Boris, and as Katya already said, I work at Wix. I'm a tech lead there at one of the companies. First of all, like Wix has offices all around the world. We have like R&D in Vilnius, in Dnipro, and here in Kyiv, which is like growing rapidly. We have over 200 employees here within a year. We have our main office in Tel Aviv, and I'm personally from an office in Beersheba. Now, most of you have never heard of Beersheba. So, Beersheba is located in the middle of a desert. So, surely as you can imagine, I feel completely at home here, that the weather is like exactly the same. It's perfect. By the way, actually, originally I'm from Dnipro. So I understand Russian, but I speak zero Ukrainian, and it's really hard for me to like have a lecture in Russian. But you can definitely ask me questions, and if your questions won't suck, I have presents for you. Okay? That's it. Right. So let's talk about readable code, right? So what is readable code, right? So we can divide it into like two categories, right? First of all, a code can be readable by computer, right? So what is readable by computer? It's easy, right? It compiles. The computer understands what in blue hell we want it to do, and if it doesn't, the feedback is pretty much instant, right? You will either get like a compile error, a runtime error, or some kind of error, and it's like usually easy to identify, easy to handle, and you can be on your way. I think the more difficult part is making the code readable by human beings, right? Because unlike computers, like, there are so many human beings, right? With different cognitive skills, different like professional skills. And overall, I think one of the biggest challenges is making it readable by humans over time, right? How many of you even encountered like cases of a code that you have written a few months ago, like you are reading it, you don't understand what the hell have you meant there, right? So it's a no easy task, right, by any means. And I think this guy, does anybody know who this is? Who is this? Right, but that's because it says GHH. Who is this?
Creator of Ruby on Rails.
Nice, and an asshole. But other than that, so yes, that's right. Who said that? Yeah, so I'm going to be throwing things, right? Oh, she's much nicer than I am. So this guy is indeed the creator of Ruby on Rails, and he summarized his day-to-day experience of reading code like this. And I agree, right? And I think despite all of that, and we all know how hard it is reading the code, because this is what we do all day long. We are not doing like the most fundamental thing we can do to make it easy. And that's invest time into like nice names, okay? And the reason is because like naming is hard, right? There is this like famous quote that there are like two hardest things in computer science, blah blah, cache and validation, blah blah. But I think like giving names is just hard, right? Like think of like giving a name to a human being, right? To your child, like you can name it like whatever the hell you want, right? Unless you're like getting really creative. And there are no implications, right? You can do whatever that, like he will hate you or she will hate you, but still. So despite it being so hard and us like suffering throughout the whole process, why does it matter? Right? So let's go over a few reasons. First of all, I think when you are discussing names with your peers, with yourself, in a bathroom, I don't know, you're basically what you're doing without even realizing is you are discussing the product. You're trying to understand the world your user lives in, the problem you're trying to solve, right? And this is super important. most of the time, when you are having hard time finding a name for something, it's pretty simple. You have an issue in your design. You usually do not understand what this thing is because you are unable to summarize in like simple like words, like its responsibilities in the system. And naming is communicating, right? It's communicating with yourself. It's communicating with your peers. You're basically telling them what does this thing do, right? You are like telling a story. And if you are telling a crappy story, well, then you and your peers will have to deal with that. And this is also the main way to cope with something called the 6-month rule. Have any of you heard about it? What is it?
It means that you should come back to this name in 6 months and check if you understand what it refers to. And if it's not clear to you, that means that you should change the name.
Yeah, it's something like that. First of all, you get the first thing I will be able to get off of bed, which is like a cute note.
Oh, that's probably thanks.
Well, I get more stuff, but it's something along those lines. Basically, there is this. It says it's a rule, but I don't know why it's a rule. Some guy decided that it's a rule, like every other thing in like programming. Somebody comes up with something, and yes, it's the best thing ever. And he says basically that in most cases, when you should go back to the code you have written 6 months ago and decide that it sucks. Okay, that's basically the deal, right? And there is some truth to it, right? Because if you think about it, like I hope at least you improve as a human being, you improve as a software engineer, right? You learn from your mistakes, you read blogs, you see tech talks like this one, like I don't know, right? And you improve. So it's pretty legit that you will go back and you will find stuff you could have done better. But I think that there is a way more fundamental reason for this being true. And this guy said it best. Does anybody know who this is? Please don't say Joel Topolsky because it says it's on the bottom. Okay, so this guy basically invented the tool all of you are using all the time, which is Stack Overflow, right? He also wrote Trello and sold it, so he's probably super rich right now. And he explained it like this, right? Basically, he says the reason it's hard for us to read, we think our code is a mess, is because reading code is way harder than writing it. Makes sense, right? So let's look at what makes a bad name, right? Let's look at some examples. First of all, vague, meaningless names, your managers, your handlers, your services, your object, your data. And the reason being is because they do not express what is the role of this thing, whatever it is in your system, right? If I would have told you, without looking at your code, what is user manager, you would have no freaking idea what it does, right? Does it deal with authentication? Does it do like CRUD operations? Does it like talk to a server, like adding and removing users? What does it do? You will not be able to tell me without going and actually looking at the implementation. I actually can relate to this one because eventually this thing becomes a bag of stuff. A bag of stuff that somehow may relate to other stuff that is in there, right? Like if I will give you like user manager, trust me, you will be adding tons of stuff that is somehow remotely connected to user, and I know like parsing its names and like different stuff, and your class will grow, like class or module, like whatever it is, will grow immensely, right? And the reason being because it will violate something called an SRP, a single responsibility principle, okay, which is one of the main principles of Solid. Does anybody know what solid principles are? Okay, cool. That's important. Without answering, you will get free stuff. Basically, it says that whatever this thing is, either it's like a method, an object, like a class, a component, whatever it is, it must do one thing. It must focus on one thing. And if it doesn't focus on one thing, there are multiple implications, but basically what will happen is it will increase in size, and then it will increase in coupling. It will get coupled. Because the more stuff it does, the more dependencies it has. The more dependencies it has, the more stuff it's coupled with. Abbreviations. These are pretty simple. Like, what is char, right? If I would like have a conversation with you, do you know what char is? Is it like a character, a characteristic? What is a mode? It's like a module. It's like modify, and like this will again cause me to go and look inside the implementation. And if I have to do this, like, what's the point of encapsulation? Like, why do we have even have encapsulation, right? Let's write everything in a single file and be done with it, right? And as I said, you cannot use them in conversation. Too many words. Guys, girls, please, I beg of you, okay, please. So, like, we will talk about it more, but like, you have to be honest with yourself, right? And like, why add more stuff, for example, when like you can describe it simpler and maintain the meaning? And like, when you find yourself writing like a huge, like writing your like life story and your like parent story as in a name, you have to be honest with yourself, right? You don't know what this thing is, right? You just don't. Simple, right? It does too many stuff, and you cannot find a short descriptive name to describe what this thing is. And then, while giving a name, you will, like, if you will be honest with yourself, you will be able to write there and then, like, have design decisions, right? So maybe I need to like divide this method into multiple methods, right? Divide this function into multiple functions, into multiple class, into multiple modules, okay? Those names are really difficult to remember, which is obvious. And it's pretty hard to identify the difference between some of them, right? Let's have a test, right? Whoever finds the difference between these names first, raise your hand. Right?
Descriptive.
Oh, took you a while. You will not get anything for this. Yeah. So, you know, and you have a name and the same. So some of you will miss that. So this is really important. Access nouns. Nouns are implementation details, right? So in this case, for example, if I have a car and start engine, like when I try, like think of a real world. When I try to start my car, do I care what goes inside? What happens inside? I just don't. I turn my key and the car starts and I don't give a crap, okay? And the problem is like it's less relevant in this example, but if I have a noun like in my name, I'm basically like exposing like the user of my API to what's going on inside. Now imagine if I would like to change the implementation, right? I don't know, and instead of an engine, use an electric motor, I don't know. How would I do it? I can't, right? So I have two choices. Either I will have like a huge refactoring, and I will go throughout my system and change the name, or I will do like go the easy route, and I will like keep the name but change the implementation, which is like horrible, right? Because you're lying to the user of your API. So just remove them. One of the issues of that are getters. Now I know like as front-end developers it's really hard for us to live without getters, and it's fine. right? We need them. Like there is no way around that. But every time we use them, like get, I don't know, engine, get whatever, we need to ask ourselves, why are we getting stuff? Okay? Many cases you will come to the conclusion that it's fine and I really need to do that. But there is a code smell called feature envy. Any of you heard of it? Okay, so feature envy basically means that instead of like telling some method or an object, perform this task on my behalf, I'm like extracting data from it, like doing some calculation, and then based on that calculation, I'm instructing that same object what to do. Now that creates a code which is not cohesive, right? So perhaps I can move my code inside that object, or inside that method, and just have it do all that calculation and decide by itself how to do the certain task. I think one of the cases, and I actually love doing that, of when it's fine to have a verb, a noun, in the name is when it's one of the parameters. Because it expresses to the user of your API that basically the certain method expects to receive certain arguments, right? I'm sure you can look like at the signature if using stuff like TypeScript or whatever, but that can be really helpful and really help readability. Having too much context. Now, there is this wonderful blog by Ella Kay, I don't remember her name, but you will receive the slides, so I really suggest you read it. Basically, it has like this long post which talks about how having too much context for a name can be helpful. So basically what she says is that she used to work in a company in which they used to have two components, two teams creating a component that looks, one of them worked on this component, one of them worked on that one. Now, you don't have to be like a super designer to see that they're pretty similar in function and they're pretty similar in their purpose, right? Basically, imagine like you have a page and you have like this huge header that promotes something, that wants to like push user to do some action. In one case, it was to sign up for a course. In other, it was to join the discussion. Right now imagine if I'm on team 1 and I'm working on this component and I am not discussing the name with other team members, right, or the members of the other team. I'm just creating it. The chances of the other team reusing this component is basically none, because there is no chance in hell they will be able to find it under the name which is so specific. It will basically prevent the use of a component and create code duplication, right? So basically this post goes like a long way to talk about naming and that kind of stuff. But basically she said that once they basically had a discussion, the two teams, about the component, they basically decided to just call it billboard, right? Because this is what it is. It's like an advertisement for something, right? And now you don't have code duplication. It's easy to find. Right? And again, the issue with all that is that having too much context prevents reuse, like varied reuse cases for your code, for your components or whatever it is. So, what is the reason for us being so crappy as developers at naming, right? We're good at so many things, and yet we pretty much suck at this. And I think one of the reasons is because we resolve to our basic instincts, right? Our basic instincts are stuff like that, right? This is what we know, right? This is what we know. This is what we've grown as developers on using, right? The Gang of Four, different like abstract factory, I don't know, objects execute or whatever, and like commands and math and all that kind of stuff, which are not really descriptive. And we're dealing with this, right? Any case can't say that, but I think the main reason is because we as a developers do not care, right, about the domain we're developing our solution for, right? Domain being basically the world in which our user lives in, right? we are not even trying to understand it, right? We live in our world of Redux and Mobex and Webpack and React. This is where we feel safe, right? We just don't want to deal with all that crap, right? We just don't. Let us read like Dan Abramov posts and enjoy ourselves. But I have quite a few questions for you, right? So, how can you build a software that solves a problem you do not understand? If you do not know what problem is your user facing that you are solving for him right now, how can you do it? Right? If you have new requirements which are coming from your user or from your product owner, how will you be able to apply them if your code is completely disconnected from the domain, right? The mapping is super hard. And of course, how can you name something you do not understand, right? If you do not know the terms used by your users or like by your product owners, you will invent concepts which your user is not familiar with, right? So if I've convinced you until that point, and I hope I have, why naming is important, let's go over some practices which will be helpful to you, I hope. First of all, it's important to understand that naming, it's next to impossible to give a perfect name on a first shot, right? Like people think that they need to go to some mountains in Tibet and meditate for a week and then come down and have this perfect name. Save your time. This will not happen, right? There are multiple awesome blog posts which basically define the steps in which you can find a name, right? And the first, actually the first step when you extract something into a function and you do not know what this thing does yet is calling it foo, right? You will not commit the code, but you don't yet understand what this thing is, and maybe you will understand later. But basically, you can refactor the name. This is the easiest refactoring you can do, right? Just rename things when you understand better what this thing does, right? So it's okay to do it in steps and to iterate all over it. That's fine. Okay? Because I've seen the 5 people in a meeting room pondering about a name and let's open thesaurus and dictionaries. Why? Right? Either you don't understand what this thing is, maybe you can just go and ask your product. Look, we have this concept. Are you familiar with this? And maybe say, oh yeah, it's I don't know, an account. Right? You need to be using customers' vocabulary in your code. Okay? And there is this wonderful book by a guy called Eric Evans called Domain-Driven Design. Any of you read it? Heard of it? Nice. You will get another notebook. So basically this book talks about tons and tons of stuff, but its main point being on how can the developers understand the domain better and how can they map that understanding to the code. Okay? Awesome book. And one of the concepts that it defines is something called the domain model. So basically, the process of understanding your vocabulary is simple, right? The book suggests that you sit down with your product and you just talk, right? So describe the problem you're trying to solve. So it goes, yeah, so our user, and he's like a dog walker, and then he has dogs, and he has users, blah, blah, and you hear different terms, right? And you create a simplified map. It doesn't have to be an XML or a class diagram or whatever. It's something informal that everybody can understand. And but what you will get after creating that simple diagram, it doesn't have to be complex, is something Eric calls ubiquitous language. Basically, you are hearing various terms, right, while talking. You hear verbs and nouns and the relation between them, right? And this creates a vocabulary. Once you have that vocabulary, you will use and you must use that vocabulary as much as possible in your code. Okay, he goes, by the way, he goes a step further, right? He says that this vocabulary must be used within your team, right? Between any two people talking about the product. Between the UX guys and the BI guys and the programmers and the product and whoever it may be. Everybody must use the same language, right? And of course, your code. Now think about it, it will just, how much easier it will be to map the requirements that you are receiving to the code when there is like a close mapping between them. Now some of you may say, well, screw that, right? Just, I hate my product, and sitting, and I don't care about dog walkers, and like sitting with people, like, and I'm talking to them, I don't like all that, right? Well, you can do the next best thing, is just use your illusion, right? Using an illusion, just imagine the real life process you are trying to create in your code, right? For example, if it's a checkout flow, I don't know, just imagine a person walking up to a counter with its products, like swiping the credit card and like packing its thing and shipping it out. And then just use those terms and names from the real world in your code, right? Even if it's not exactly like the vocabulary, but this is the next best thing, right? But the most important thing is to try to limit and close the gap between your code and the real world, okay? The next tip comes from this guy, whose name is Robert Martin, also known as Uncle Bob. Anybody know who this is? Yes, he's our Lord and Savior, people. First of all, if you haven't read his book, The Clean Code, it's amazing, amazing. It basically teaches you how to be like a software engineer, right? From naming your variables to creating an architecture. Highly, highly recommended. He has like a series of videos. Can't recommend it enough. And he says that clean code reads like a well-written prose. Okay? Now, to understand what this guy meant, we need to first of all define what prose is. Prose, and I stole it from Wikipedia, because I'm lazy, says that prose is like the closest thing to our natural language, right? That's it, the way we speak. And what he meant is when I read the code, it needs to be closer to the sentence, to the way I would say the sentence in my own native language, right? And here I have a couple of examples, really simple, right? If you will read this code, like if car speed is twice the limit, speaker generate alert, right? So, if candidate car specification, the color red and in approved city or convertible, if candidate car is satisfied by car, blah, blah, blah. Now, when I read it, it's pretty much close to the way we speak, right? So, this is what we need to strive for. Read what you have written. Don't just write it and move forward. Take a break and read it. Okay, this will be super helpful to you. Couple of less obvious classes should be nouns that should describe the role the thing fulfills in your system. This relates to the stuff that we spoke about, the manager, the handler. Does not describe anything. Okay, the role needs to be specific, and it will. When the name will be specific, it will limit the stuff that can go inside that class or a module or whatever it is. Okay? This again goes back to like being honest with yourself. If the name makes it hard for your teammates or yourself to locate the thing you have created, don't just wave people off, right? If it's one person, that's fine. But if you hear multiple complaints like, look, I cannot find this thing that you have created, maybe you have used some term that is unfamiliar to your other team members. Maybe it's a synonym to something that everybody is already familiar with. You need to stop and think, why is it happening, right? Methods are really helpful, right? Methods, functions, whatever, because they help to identify multiple responsibilities. First of all, the function name can identify whether or not it does more than one thing, right? Remember single responsibility principle. If you have stuff like and, or in the name of the function, it probably does more than one thing. Inside the class, it actually also helps very much. There is a guy called Michael Feathers, and he has this wonderful example of a class. Like plus says it's a public function, it's irrelevant to JavaScript because everything is public, but nonetheless, it has this like one private public method and multiple private methods. Actually, he's calling it an iceberg class because you have like one public and lots of stuff under the water. And looking at those names, we can see like parse, token, and we see like hold up, like judging just by the names, I can see that it's dealing with too much stuff. It's dealing with tokenization and parsing and all that kind of stuff. Now, and right, again, not looking at implementation, I can decide that I can split it up into multiple classes. Like this is just an example of like taking like the tokenization part outside into a separate class. And first of all, I immediately receive benefit. I receive a way smaller class, right? Which is like focused on doing one thing, and another class which is also really small, easily modifiable, and if you are doing TDD like we're doing at Wix, this is like super helpful, right? Having like smaller focused class, the testing becomes super easy. So we spoke about that. There is a concept in software engineering called like query command separation. So basically, when you have a query method, we should name it as a noun. Don't like the whole thing with like get balance. I never understood it. Like from a personal side, like why just not say like balance? What does get give me? Right? Like, I think if it's a noun, that's enough. Right? It even hurts readability. I'd say, right? Because if get balance more than 2 reads way worse than if balance is more than 2. I think. Commands basically should be verbs. Again, we've seen examples of that. It's great practice to include prepositions like of to help describe the relation between parameters, right? Pay amount of, move to. It again like creates a connection between a name and its arguments, right? It's basically like, especially in JavaScript, like it's very valuable to tell the user of the API that he's expected to provide parameters. And it's super important when giving a name to a function to describe everything it does. Do not surprise the user of your API of saying that, I don't know, it calculates 2 plus 2, but in addition, without describing it, it like saves stuff to local storage and does an HTTP request. Like you wouldn't like to be surprised like that, right? If the function does something, this is what it should be doing. Do not hide anything, okay? That like should be interesting to your user, right? Again, there is like a balance of like hiding implementation details, but be like honest. Interfaces. There's like odd practice of adding I to the interface names. I have no idea why, because like having like class team and that like implements I team. No idea. Like that. I tried finding where it comes from. It comes like from ancient Java. That they started it. I don't know why.
No, it's Apple lover.
What?
Apple lovers.
Really?
iMac, iBook, all that.
Yeah.
No, that comes from C#.
Yeah. I charge like $500 for like an adapter. That's what it stands for. Again, I have no idea why, because interfaces are like an abstract concept, right? They create like an abstract concept at the time of like something, right? I can have like a translator, like, which is an interface. Imagine like from the user standpoint, like the method that uses the API, right? It expects to get a translator of some sort. I do not care that it's an interface. I just care that I receive something, a translator of some sort that has different methods. That's it. That's all I care about. It can also represent a capability, like a deliverable, like makes noise and kind of stuff like that, a capability of a class that uses it. And it really can help identify, again, an SRP violation, right? Because if I have a class that extends tons and tons of interfaces which are not related to each other, maybe it does too much, okay? Again, you need to be honest and be aware of that kind of stuff. Booleans, again, that for some reason, many people, all they know is like adding is to every Boolean. Is this, is that. Guys, English is a really rich language. You have stuff like should, can, and has. And you can use like if piece is on square, if player has balance of. Again, just think about like if, again, by the way, it's an excellent example of the stuff that reads like a well-written prose. If I would substitute has with is, player is balance of, or like is purchase, it sounds ridiculous. So to end the talk, I would like give you like a couple of like tips, like summarize. First of all, renaming is part of your refactoring. Don't just break things up into smaller things and combine them. Renaming is part of it, and it's easy. Again, it's the easiest refactoring you can do. Okay, other than deleting stuff. Just do it. Okay. Use customers' vocabulary, right? For multiple reasons that we've discussed. First of all, understanding the problem, right? Understanding the problem you're solving. And again, it will just bring the code in the real world and the requirements way closer. Make sure you can read your code. Don't just write it and just push it and like screw it. Take a break, go grab a beer, write, and just read it and see if you still understand what you have written. If it reads like a well-written prose and all that kind of stuff. Be open to feedback. Again, if your teammates are coming to you and they're saying that they do not understand what you meant, and they do not understand like what was the purpose of the code and like all that kind of stuff. Or even if they're telling you like, look, like we have this concept already defined, and you have created like another concept under a different name. Again, it's important to be open for feedback. Again, communicate names with other people, be consistent, this is what we discussed about. Talk with people, discuss stuff. Again, maybe you will uncover that the concept already exists, and you don't need to even come up with a new name, just use the existing one. And again, discussing this kind of stuff with your teammates is super important. And I think the main one is just don't give up. It's hard, it's really not an easy task, right? But it's super important. Super important, because again, you're reading tons of code on a daily basis, and yeah, we're sure it will be helpful. Like if your task would be much easier. Okay? That's it. Okay. Questions? Yeah.
Sorry, maybe not good English from me, but
Можно
one
на
question.
русском.
You say...
Можно на русском.
Можно на русском? О, супер. Ты сказал, что когда ты начинаешь программировать, да, ты решаешь какую-то проблему. И ты вот как бы... Когда ты начинаешь программировать, ты решаешь проблему, да? И вот не зная этой проблемы, ты не можешь программировать, да? Ну вот как бы, я прав?
Ты можешь программировать, а никто не ставит, ты можешь как бы все
Просто,
записать.
видишь, как, я хотел сказать так, вот когда ты программируешь и решаешь эту проблему, ты не знаешь, как должен твой код быть построен. Ну ты не знаешь, какая... Заберите его. Я имел в виду, что ты знаешь, как должен быть построен твой код, потому что проблема еще не решена. Это в случае Викса, например, проблема уже была решена. с другими проектами. Поэтому, например, написать было код с использованием всех методологий, это работает. А вот в бизнесе это, к сожалению, не работает. Когда ты решаешь проблему, ты не знаешь, как ее решить. Поэтому зачастую вот то, что ты там показал картинку, когда код пишется на ногах, это и есть 90% бизнеса. Бизнес никто не платит за рефакторинг. Но вот просто я вот к тому, что как свести вот этот вот баланс, чтобы мы экономим деньги на разработчиках и при этом делаем красивый код.
Как получить дешево, быстро и
Вот,
да?
So,
Одно выбросить.
so there are like multiple parts here of your question. First of all, I never said that, like, of course, the amount, like, the structure of the code is unknown to me, right? Moreover, it will, I read some, like, in some book that, like, the code is not like, your program is not like a building, it's a city, like it evolves all the time. Like the structure changes and it evolves. I agree completely. Yet, in order to understand, like, what I meant, like, you need to understand the business of your user. Because when you create concepts in your code and you need to name them, no matter what their structure is, I'm not by any means saying that you need to, like, take all the concepts and create them ahead of time. No way, right? But when the time comes and you do need to create them, do not reinvent the wheel. That's what I'm saying. Now, that's one point. Regarding the thing that you're saying, like, well, that you're not being paid for refactoring. Let me ask you another question. Do you think your, like, client will appreciate the fact that, like, the first feature will be ready in a week, but the second feature will be ready in, like, 3 months? Like, this is what not doing refactoring gives you, right? Like, keeping the code clean, of course, it's not meant to, like, I don't know, make you, like, sleep not good at night and, like, go to your girlfriend and say, like, look, like, it's SOP, I'm not violating it. Nobody gives a shit, right? But this allows you to evolve your code quickly and bring value to market quickly. And trust me, your user is not a technical person, but he will appreciate the fact that you will ship in time. And maybe you will ship in time, like, at first, but trust me, and I'm telling you, like, with time, you will suffer because, and your user will suffer, right? That's it. Refactoring is not meant to, like, make you feel good about how good of a developer you are, right?
We have time for one more question. Wait, do you have a question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have a mic.
Go with it.
Hello and thank you for your report and stuff. Oh, there's a bit dumb question. You told that you should not surprise users with the function that is still inside. But, you know, I can separate my function by more than 2 of them. But should I do this messy stuff or should I just hide some stuff still? So that's the question.
Yeah, I'd say that, again, that's what I said. There is, like, a balance of like, exposing implementation details, of, like, being way too concrete, like, I don't know, like, fire an HTTP request using, like, Axios with, I don't know, whatever. But again, there is, like, a balance there of exposing too much details, but which is, like, bad, because then you will encounter the thing of, like, changing implementation and you won't be able to. But on the other hand, again, there is important stuff that me as the user of your function need to be aware of. For example, a side effect that happens, right? If there, for example, I don't know, besides doing the calculation, it's also being persisted somewhere, right? This is an important detail. I think, like, think of yourself, if you calculate, like, call a function to calculate something, but underneath it also, like, calls a server to update something, it's an important detail. So there is, like, a balance there that you need to, like, maintain.
Right. Thank you.
Sure.
Could you write?
1 minute left.
Could you write this, I don't know, lecture on video? Because I need it for my students.
It will be video on
It's a
our
very
YouTube
good
channel.
lecture. I like to see all the how to knowing things stuff in one very dense.
Можно на русском.
Да, можно, короче, более очень плотном докладе. И хотелось бы иметь это в видео. Я думаю, это будет достаточно полезная, годами используемая штука, потому что те вещи, которые ты назвал, это не JavaScript, и они не пропадут через 2 года.
As far as I know, I see camera there, so it's probably being recorded. So. I hope so.
Вроде слишком очевидно.
У нас будет видео на нашем YouTube канале. We'll have video on our YouTube channel.